I want you to imagine a world for a second. Just imagine a world where the things you learn, the degrees you earn, and the very way your intelligence is measured are no longer strictly human endeavors.
Right.
You sit down to solve a complex problem or, write a thesis or develop a brand new business strategy, and the thoughts on the page aren't just yours.
Exactly.
They belong to an invisible, algorithmic partner. And whether you are a lifelong learner, a student navigating the system, or just someone trying to stay relevant in the modern workforce, the very definition of what we call knowledge is shifting under your feet as we speak.
It really is a profound shift to wrap your head around. I mean, for centuries, we've been conditioned to think of knowledge as something that originates exclusively within a human mind.
Yeah.
A human observes, a human synthesizes, a human concludes. But we are crossing this threshold where that basic assumption is being systematically dismantled.
And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are looking at a deeply insightful source text. It's called the Epistemic Transformation, Reimagining Higher Education in the Age of Generative AI, and it's by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover.
It's a fantastic text.
It really is. And I want to be clear right out of the gate for everyone listening, this isn't just another discussion about students secretly using ChatGPT to cheat on their history essays.
No, not at all.
We are going way past that. We are exploring how AI is fundamentally reshaping the epistemic foundations of higher education.
Right.
Which basically means we are looking at how knowledge is actually created and validated in the first place. We'll explore the rise of what Dr. Westover calls the algorithmic university and how institutions are either passively surrendering to this or intentionally fighting back.
And this matters immensely to you, the listener, regardless of whether you've stepped foot on a college campus recently. Because the systems and philosophies being built in universities right now, well, they're the exact same frameworks that will soon dictate how knowledge is managed in your workplace.
Oh, for sure.
In your local government, in your daily life. I mean, if we don't understand how this systemic shift operates at the university level, we are going to be completely blindsided by how it alters our own everyday reality.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can talk about how universities are structurally changing, we really have to understand how the nature of knowledge itself is changing.
Yes.
The text uses this phrase, describing generative AI as an epistemic co-agent. And to me, that sounds very different from the educational tech we are used to.
It's completely different.
Right. I mean, we've had adaptive quizzes that tell you if you got a math problem wrong for years. So how is this fundamentally different?
Well, you have to think about the underlying mechanism. Past educational technologies were basically passive instruments. They were decision support tools.
Yeah.
A grading software, for instance, just takes an existing human process and, does it faster.
It just automates it.
Exactly. But generative architectures like large language models operate differently. They are essentially these massive predictive engines that have ingested a huge portion of human history, culture, and science.
Right.
And because of that scale, they produce original synthesis, they engage in open-ended contextual dialogue.
Yeah.
They can cross over disciplinary boundaries, jumping from biology to poetry to economics without needing specific separate programming for each one.
Which is wild.
It really is. They are acting as active participants in intellectual territory we previously thought belonged only to human beings.
The source text has this wild example that really drove this home for me. Picture a doctoral student, right? They were studying 18th century correspondence. In the old days, they would spend like 5 years in a dusty archive, reading these letters one by one, trying to keep track of names and dates on the little index card.
Oh yeah, the old shoebox method.
Exactly. But instead, this modern student feeds thousands of digitized letters into a large language model. And the AI doesn't just put them in chronological order.
No, it goes much further.
Because it can process semantic connections at a scale the human brain simply cannot hold in its working memory, the AI finds completely unexpected social networks.
Right.
It proposes new interpretive hypotheses based on subtle rhetorical patterns across thousands of pages. And then the student takes those ideas and refines them into a brilliant paper.
Which is great, but
it begs a massive question. Who gets the credit? Is that the student's brilliant discovery, or is that a co-constructed human algorithmic discovery?
what's fascinating here is that this is the defining tension of this era. Who is the actual author of that knowledge? Because the AI didn't just organize the data, it actually provided the interpretive leap.
To me, it feels like the difference between using a tool and taking on a partner. Like, let me try an analogy here.
F for it.
If traditional software is like a really high-powered calculator, it just does exactly what you tell it to do, but way faster.
Sure.
Then generative AI is more like hiring a ghostwriter who suddenly starts arguing with you about the plot of your own book.
That's a great way to put it.
It brings its own structural logic to the table. At what point does a tool stop being a tool and become a co-creator?
Well, this exact dynamic is why traditional university policies are completely falling apart right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When universities try to just, you know, tweak their existing plagiarism rules to deal with AI, they are still operating under the assumption that AI is a passive instrument.
They're treating it like the calculator.
Exactly. They're basically trying to police a calculator, but they're completely ignoring the reality of what researchers call distributed cognition.
Distributed cognition, meaning the thinking is spread out.
Exactly. Knowledge is no longer emerging from an isolated human mind. It is emerging from the interaction between the human and the machine, a human-AI assemblage. You cannot just assess the human in isolation anymore because the knowledge itself wouldn't exist without that specific interaction. The old rules just don't apply to this new mechanism of discovery.
And because AI is now this active, unpredictable participant in creating knowledge, the institutions that govern knowledge, the universities themselves, are having to fundamentally restructure the way they operate.
I have no choice.
Which brings us to this big concept in the source text, the algorithmic university. What does that actually look like in practice?
So the algorithmic university is an institutional model where human-centered, deliberative governance is actively replaced by automated optimization-focused management.
Okay, so machines making the calls.
Yes.
Yeah.
It means core educational processes are taken out of the hands of human educators. Decisions about who gets admitted, what courses a student is advised to take, or even how a curriculum is designed over time are handed over to data-driven systems.
Dr. Westover identifies a few massive drivers pushing universities into this algorithmic model. Like, why are they doing this?
Well, there are three main reasons.
Right. First, there's intense competitive pressure. It is basically institutional FOMO, fear of missing out.
Oh, definitely.
Universities are terrified of looking outdated to prospective students who expect a seamless, tech-forward experience. And then second, there's administrative efficiency.
Which is huge.
And third, there's this heavy mandate for workforce preparation.
Well,
Employers are loudly demanding AI-literate graduates, even if nobody in the corporate world really agrees on what that literacy looks like yet.
those drivers are incredibly powerful because they sound completely rational on the surface. I mean, they create a momentum that bypasses a lot of the traditional, slow-moving pedagogical debate that used to happen on college campuses.
But I have to push back on this for a second, because looking at those drivers, aren't efficiency and workforce preparation objectively good things?
Well,
I mean, so many universities are struggling financially right now. They're facing enrollment cliffs and budget cuts. If an algorithm can automate the mundane stuff like scheduling, basic advising, administration, so that a school can actually save money and keep its doors open for you, the learner, shouldn't we celebrate that? Isn't that a massive win for access to education?
it is a completely logical pushback. We absolutely want institutions to survive, and nobody wants a clunky, inefficient administrative system.
Right.
But the problem lies in the hidden costs of how that efficiency is achieved, and specifically, who controls the algorithms doing the optimizing.
What do you mean by who controls them?
Well, think about how this plays out financially. Most under-resourced universities cannot afford to build their own custom AI.
Oh, right. It's expensive.
Very. So to save money, they buy commercial platforms off the shelf. And when they do that, they are effectively ceding their governance to third-party tech vendors.
Oh, wow.
And those vendors design systems based on their own commercial priorities. Your algorithms are optimized for data extraction, market imperatives, and, minimizing liability.
Not education.
Exactly. They are not optimizing for deep educational commitments like intellectual autonomy, exploratory learning, or humanistic inquiry.
Ah, I see. So if a vendor builds an advising AI, its goal is probably to get you to graduate as fast as possible to make its success metrics look good for the next sales pitch.
You hit the nail on the head.
It's going to steer you away from a challenging but rewarding class because you might get a B instead of an A.
Precisely. And this creates a severe new layer of educational stratification.
Inequality.
Right. The elite, wealthy universities have the resources to build proprietary AI that actually aligns with their specific educational values. Meanwhile, struggling schools buy the commercial product that treats their students like data points to be processed on a conveyor belt.
That commercial optimization-first approach directly leads to a cascade of unintended negative consequences for the actual human beings inside these institutions.
It really does.
The text highlights a few of these human costs, and they are pretty alarming. First, there's algorithmic bias. For example, admissions and financial aid systems are trained on historical data. So if you are an applicant from a non-traditional background, your profile diverges from that historical pattern of success, and the algorithm systematically disadvantages you.
And that bias doesn't stop at the admissions office. It follows students right into the classroom. The source text points out that automated plagiarism detectors are generating massive amounts of false positives.
Well, I've heard about this.
And the data shows these systems disproportionately target multilingual students.
Okay, I want to dig into that. How does that actually happen? Like, why does a machine think a human student is a machine just because they speak multiple languages?
Right, so it comes down to a technical concept involving predictability and something called burstiness.
Burstiness.
Yeah, burstiness. AI language models generate text by mathematically predicting the most statistically likely next word.
Okay.
Because of that, their writing tends to have very uniform sentence lengths and highly predictable vocabulary. But human writing, natively, is usually bursty.
Meaning it's kind of all over the place.
Exactly. We use varied sentence lengths, odd vocabulary choices, mixed structures. We are naturally messy.
Right. Our brains don't work like predictive text.
No, they don't. But consider a multilingual student who is working incredibly hard to follow strict formal academic English grammar rules that they just recently mastered.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. They often write in a very careful, structured, and predictable way to ensure they are correct. They don't have that native messiness in their academic writing yet.
Wow.
The detection algorithm sees that structural predictability, misinterprets it, and flags the human's hard work as AI generated.
That is incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
You are essentially punishing a student for being too grammatically precise.
Exactly.
And then there's the surveillance aspect.
Yeah.
Universities are increasingly using learning analytics to flag at-risk students. But what that actually does is create a massive surveillance infrastructure.
Constant monitoring.
If you know that every click in your digital portal, every reading you download, every pause on a video is being monitored to predict your future success, you stop taking risks. It creates a chilling effect on exploratory learning.
The psychological impact of being constantly optimized is profound. I mean, today's students have access to an always available AI tutor and brainstorming partner, which is undeniably helpful.
Sure.
But the human cost is the loss of what educators call productive struggle.
That phrase really stuck with me, productive struggle.
Yeah.
It's like relying on your phone's GPS to navigate your own hometown.
That's a great comparison.
Sure, you get to your destination a few minutes faster, and that's technically highly efficient. But after a year of never having to look at street signs or memorize landmarks or figure out a detour on your own, you realize your internal compass has completely atrophied.
You've lost the skill.
You are entirely lost without the machine. Are we outsourcing our cognitive struggle to the point of intellectual de-skilling?
This raises an important question about what universities are actually measuring anymore. When a university optimizes its entire system purely for what an algorithm can quantify, things like retention rates, completion times, and time to degree, they inherently marginalize unquantifiable human traits.
Like what?
Well, how does an algorithm measure a student's development of ethical reasoning? It can't.
Right.
How does it measure civic engagement or creative expression? It doesn't. So those traits become secondary to the machine's metrics, and it's not just the students.
It's the teachers, too.
Yeah, faculty face de-skilling, too, because their nuanced pedagogical judgment is being outsourced to standardized AI rubrics.
It paints a pretty bleak picture of the future, honestly. But thankfully, the text doesn't stop there. Dr. Westover argues that since passive adoption of these commercial tools leads to de-skilling and bias, institutions must intentionally design human-AI partnerships to reclaim their educational mission.
There is hope.
We have some incredible examples from the text of universities actually taking back control.
Yes, this is where we see that concept of distributed cognition being applied thoughtfully. These universities are moving beyond the simplistic binary of human versus machine and actually designing for the partnership.
Right. Take Georgia Tech, for example. They have a program called ATA, that stands for Human AI Teaching Assistance.
It's a really innovative program.
They use AI to handle routine factual questions in massive classes, which frees up the human professors.
Mm,
But the key is that they do it with operational transparency.
that's crucial.
The students are explicitly told they are talking to an AI. It doesn't pretend to be human. And more importantly, there are clear, immediate pathways to escalate the question to a human TA the second things get complex or nuanced.
And contrast that with what Stanford is doing with their digital education initiative. They built a custom AI writing system for their composition courses.
Oh, yeah.
But instead of generating text, the tool is built entirely for pedagogy. It focuses strictly on the writing process.
How does it do that without just writing the essay for them?
By analyzing argumentation and structure rather than generating prose. So, a student submits a draft, and the AI might highlight a section and say, your thesis in paragraph 1 doesn't seem to connect to the evidence you provided in paragraph 3.
Oh, that's clever.
Right. How might you bridge that logical gap? It explicitly refuses to write alternative text for the student. It won't do the work for you. It forces you back into that productive struggle we talked about.
I love that. It's an obstacle course, not an escalator.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the University of Edinburgh's Critical AI Studies program. They aren't just teaching students how to code or how to write clever prompts.
Oh, it's much deeper.
They are teaching algorithmic literacy, which means demystifying the political economy of these schools and interrogating their epistemological biases.
Those are heavy terms, but the concepts are incredibly grounded. I mean, teaching the political economy means teaching a student to ask, well, who owns the massive server farms running this model?
Right.
Whose data was scraped, often without permission or compensation, to train it? Who is profiting every time I use it?
Following the money and power. And the epistemological bias.
That's asking whose version of truth is baked into this model. If the AI was trained mostly on Western English-speaking internet data, it will inherently marginalize indigenous knowledge or non-Western perspectives. Edinburgh is teaching students to see the invisible biases in the machine.
That is so vital. And finally, the University of Michigan has this fascinating AI learning lab where they treat AI integration in the classroom as research rather than a final corporate implementation.
It's a brilliant approach.
They give faculty a safe space to experiment. If a professor tries a new AI tool and it totally fails, there are no career penalties. Their tenure isn't at risk.
These are prime examples of prioritizing pedagogy over technical capability. They are intentionally shaping the technology rather than letting the tech vendors dictate the terms of learning.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. When I look at all these examples, Georgia Tech, Stanford, Edinburgh, Michigan, it feels like, well, instead of banning the calculator, these schools are completely redesigning the math test to measure entirely new skills.
Yes.
They aren't sticking their heads in the sand and pretending the AI doesn't exist, but they aren't letting it do the thinking for them either.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. What these institutions are doing is cultivating what the text calls distributed epistemic sensitivity.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But they aren't just teaching you how to use a tool. They are developing your judgment on when to use it.
Right.
When is statistical pattern recognition actually useful to you? And when does the situation require human ethical reasoning, interpretive sophistication, or contextual understanding? That discernment is becoming the single most vital skill a modern learner can possess.
But sometimes the most intentional choice a university can make isn't about how to use AI. Sometimes it's having the institutional courage to refuse it altogether.
Yes, the power of refusal. This is perhaps the most countercultural idea in the entire source text.
Right.
In an environment driven by that institutional FOMO we discussed earlier, saying no to new technology is a radical act.
The text highlights the Technical University of Munich. They set up an AI governance council. But they didn't just make it an advisory board that university administrators could nod at and then ignore.
No, it has teeth.
This council holds binding veto authority over any AI procurements. If a slick, commercially attractive platform fails to meet their strict equity or transparency criteria, the council vetoes it. The university cannot buy it. Full stop.
And then there is the fascinating example of Reed College, a liberal arts institution.
Yeah.
They were evaluating an AI course recommendation system that many of their peer institutions were eagerly adopting.
Right.
The algorithm was designed to optimize for on-time graduation and credit efficiency. It would automatically guide students down the fastest, most direct, mathematically optimized path to a degree.
Which sounds great to a bean counter.
Exactly.
But Reed College looked at that and said, wait, we actually value inefficiency. They want their students taking random electives completely outside their major.
Yeah.
They want them exploring obscure topics, changing their minds, and extending their thesis projects. They realized the algorithm would have actively discouraged the very exploratory learning that defines their entire liberal arts mission.
Right.
So they completely refused the AI and deliberately chose to invest their money into more expensive human academic advising instead.
They recognized that the algorithm's definition of success was directly opposed to the institution's definition of an educated person.
So what does this all mean? I have to challenge you on this because looking at Reed College, they are a prestigious, wealthy, liberal arts school.
True.
In a broader world driven by fierce competition, shrinking state budgets, and major enrollment crises, is it actually realistic for normal institutions to just say no to the future? Or is Reed College just a privileged exception to the rule?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's not about saying no to the future. It's about having a purpose-driven identity.
Okay.
Higher education is not meant to just be a factory for employment preparation. It serves vital social functions: civic preparation, cultural preservation, critical inquiry.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If a university cannot articulate why those things matter more than simple operational efficiency, they will be consumed by the algorithms. Defending those human purposes requires resisting the dominant narrative that efficiency is a self-evident good. It requires institutional courage from everyone, not just the wealthy schools.
It really is a battle for the soul of these institutions. To briefly recap the journey we've been on today, we've seen how generative AI is no longer just a fancy tool. It is a co-creator, fundamentally changing what it means to author knowledge. We've explored how, if left unchecked to commercial algorithms, universities risk massive bias and the intellectual de-skilling of their students. But through intentional design, transparent systems, and sometimes the sheer courage to embrace human inefficiency, institutions can actually preserve our human agency.
And for you, the listener, the core takeaway is clear. Developing epistemic literacy, that discernment and sensitivity we discuss, is the most critical skill you can cultivate right now. Knowing when to trust an algorithmic pattern and when to rely on your own messy human intuition and ethical judgment is what will differentiate you. That holds true whether you're sitting in a classroom, leading a boardroom, or just navigating the information in your daily life.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final lingering thought for you to mull over. We talked earlier about knowledge now being co-created by these human AI assemblages.
Right.
If our future discoveries, our future artworks, our future medical breakthroughs are going to be fundamentally co-authored with AI, will the concept of individual human genius simply cease to exist in the next 50 years?
What happens to the human ego when we finally have to admit we are no longer the smartest entities in the room?
We started today by imagining a world where the degrees you earn and the way your intelligence is measured aren't strictly human endeavors. The truth is, you don't have to imagine it anymore.
No, you don't.
That world is already here. The question is how you choose to navigate it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.